Thank you, and I'm very happy to be here. This has been a lot of fun so far, and thank you everybody who's here for sticking around to the bitter end. I guess it won't be a bitter end because I guess we got popcorn after this, so we've got that to look forward to. So this is a project that is also special in the sense of being different from some of the others. This is a project that's more about sort of social preferences in a general sense. We're looking at peer punishment in this and how it works in settings where we want people to cooperate. This is a project with my former student, Patrick Aquino, and my colleague, Bob Ghazali, whom some of you know. So just to sort of frame what we're trying to do here, we're looking at social dilemma types of settings. We're looking at settings where we want voluntary cooperation. And I'm going to speak generally, and then I will show you the specific social dilemma setting that we will be looking in. But hopefully we think this applies to many different social dilemma settings. So obviously, public good contributions is the kind of thing that we've been thinking about through a lot of today and yesterday, right? That is a lot what we've been thinking about here. Donations to charity is a prime example. Common pool resources are another case where we want cooperation. We want to get people to overexploit common pool resources less. Principal agent settings, also known as gift exchange settings, is another setting where we need voluntary cooperations. These are all settings where voluntary cooperation is sort of what makes the world go round. So, you know, a boss needs the employee to voluntarily put forth effort because you cannot contract for every little element of that employment relationship. So we need voluntary cooperation there. And in each of these settings, it is the case that you want that good behavior, but individuals have an incentive not to give it, right? And so that's sort of the fundamental of a lot of what the researchers in this room, a lot of what we work on. You want me to behave well, it is my incentive to do badly. And so we want to figure out how to get people to behave better. And so in a lot of situations, it is the case that you cannot formally enforce good behavior. You cannot force people to give to charity. Well, I guess you kind of can. We tax them, right? But in the small, it's very hard in many situations to enforce good behavior. But in many of these situations, peer monitoring may be possible. So it is the case that my employer or the government can't force me to behave well right now, but Daniel may be able to, as a peer, monitor me and find ways to influence my behavior. And in fact, he may be able to punish me. Right? So, he's docking my pay now, he's docking my tie, right? So the question is, in these scenarios in which we want to elicit voluntary cooperation, will people cooperate more or cooperate less if you give peers this opportunity to punish each other? And this is a general question, and it applies to a lot of different kinds of settings. The evidence from the literature is mixed. Many of you know this literature, some of you do not, and I will tell you a little bit more about it. But sometimes when you add a peer punishment institution, you get better outcomes, you get more donations, you get more good behavior, and in some cases you get less. So we want to know why. That was our impetus in doing this. But in so doing, I think we're learning a little bit more about when and how punishment can actually work and social preferences in general. And I don't think that I need to convince many people in this room that lab experiments are a good place to study this kind of thing, right? So we're going to start with a particular institution and just make small tweaks to it to try to understand what's going on with punishment. So just to give everyone a little bit of background, what we're talking about when we talk about punishment is we're talking about a case where the punisher can reduce the payoff to the punishee. So Daniel can reduce my benefits by cutting my time, but we're talking about a case where this punishment is costly, so he's going to bear some kind of a cost. So this may be monetary, and in the experiment I'm going to show you, we're going to talk about money costs on both sides, right? But it may be non-monetary. Here I just talked about time and maybe some social stigma. Not that you would face social stigma necessarily, but you know, it's a possibility, right? In the world of philanthropy, right, you can think of a classic way to punish people who would be low donors or non-donors is to shame them, name and shame them, right? So that is a kind of peer punishment that you can think about in these kinds of settings. So the literature on this, people have thought about punishment as a way to improve cooperation for some decades, and some very important Nobel Prize winning people have worked on this. And in fact, If you look at the public goods literature, this is probably the single most effective intervention in increasing cooperation in public goods games. If you look just at cooperation numbers, then the biggest effect that you can have is add a pure punishment institution. And I'll talk about what I mean by public goods games. I'll talk about what I mean about how it works in that setting. But the literature is very strong that, in general, add a punishment institution, you get better behavior. But there's this other whole literature, some of it written by some of the same people, that shows when you add a punishment institution to a different kind of social dilemma, which is a gift exchange game, more like the employment relationship that I showed you a moment ago, that you get these worse outcomes. You get reduced cooperation as compared to a case where people can't punish each other, right? So this is our starting point. And what we want to know is, why is this different? You might be saying to yourself, well, it sounds like you're talking about different games. And the point that I want to make is these are both social dilemmas. So these are both things where we think a lot of the same social forces, altruism, reciprocity, all these things that we've been talking about for the last couple of days, we think a lot of those things should be operating in the same way in these things. So we think punishment should work the same way in both situations. Let me talk you through the games briefly. So a public goods game, right? We're talking about a situation where we have a group of people here, so we are all cooperating on a common endeavor. Each of us has an incentive to not contribute to the common endeavor, but everyone is best served if we all contribute to that, right? So there's an incentive to free ride, but everybody does best if we all contribute to the common good. Gift exchange game, slightly different structure, typically has two entities, right? And in this case, what we're talking about is a situation where there's a first mover and Daniel gets to take an action to send something to me, right? And then I, as a second mover, get to take an action that reciprocates, that sends back to him. And there is pie increasing. The pie is being made higher in both of these scenarios. The pie is made higher in the public goods game when everybody contributes. The pie is made higher in a gift exchange or trust game, either in the send or in the return, depending on how the game is structured. We're going to do it in the return, and I'll show you what I mean by that. So these games look somewhat different, but they all depend on cooperation to make the pie higher, okay? You might say that there are some differences between these games, and these may drive the differences in results that we see in the punishment literature. And we're going to argue that the big effect is probably not from that, but just from how punishment has historically been implemented in these games. Has nothing to do with these games, just has to do with what the initial papers were and how they implemented punishment in these games, and others have followed them since then. So we're going to focus on when punishment happens and size of punishment. Let me just show you quickly. In the public goods game, typically in this literature, what happens is we all make our decisions to contribute, and then each of us gets to see what the other has done, and then you decide whether to punish me, I decide whether to punish you, and we do that after the cooperative action, right? And the argument has been made that in the gift exchange game, because what happens is that when Daniel makes his send decision to me, he also at the same time says, oh, and by the way, if you don't do what I want, then I'll punish you. So he's wielding a stick. There's this feeling that that might crowd out this pro-social behavior. So it would be like a charity saying, please donate, oh, and by the way, if you don't, we're going to shame you. So there's this feeling that you have some negative feeling as a result of that. So that's one thing we're going to vary, and I'll show you exactly how. The other thing that has historically been different between how punishment is implemented in these games is the size of the punishment. And so in the public goods games, it just has historically been the case that punishment has been very powerful. So John can pay $1 to take $3 away from me. Whereas in gift exchange games, historically, it's typically been much weaker punishment. So you pay $1 to take just $1 from me. So we're going to vary those things. We're not going to start from the public good game because we think it's pretty well understood. Public good game, you add punishment, people cooperate more. That's a story that I think makes sense to a lot of people, right? Because I'm afraid that I'll be punished, and so I behave better. So we're going to start from the gift exchange game and work from there to try to see if when we tweak punishment to make it more like how it is in a public good game, to see whether we can get these good outcomes from punishment like we see in the public goods game. So I'm going to show you the experiment design real quick. We're going to start from the gift exchange game with no punishment, and it's a two-person setting. We've got a principal and an agent. First action is that the principal chooses a wage, chooses a transfer to send. Second action is that the agent chooses an effort level. So you can think of that as trust and reciprocity, right? The effort level redounds to higher benefits to the principal. So the cooperative action that we are going to be focusing on in everything that we do is the choice of effort, okay? So that's going to be, that's the thing that makes the pie higher, so that's the thing that we care about. When we add punishment, we're going to start with punishment as it has typically been implemented in gift exchange games. We're calling it ex ante punishment. This is the thing where Daniel's wielding the stick at me as he's sending me the wage. He is telling me the wage he's going to give me. He's also telling me a punishment profile. All that means is at these different levels of effort, this is how much I'm going to punish you. If you work a low effort, I'm going to punish you, but if you work, effort 2 or higher, then I won't punish you. So there is that publicly pre-committed to threat. In punishment that is timed more like it has typically been in the public goods games, we call that ex post punishment. So the punishment is not publicly pre-committed to. Daniel sends his wage, I choose my effort, and then upon seeing that, Daniel says, oh, okay, well, I will punish her this much as a result of the action that she chose. Okay? So that's more like how it has typically been done in public goods games. So this gives us 5 treatments that I'm going to tell you about. The first is the baseline game, the gift exchange game. And then there are the 4 treatments with punishment where we're crossing the timing of when punishment happens with how strong punishment is. Remember I said before, high power or low power, okay? High power, low power being I pay $1, it takes $1 away from the other guy. High power being I pay $1, it takes $3 away. In the baseline gift exchange game, we predict 0 effort. All of you economists can sing along with this. Like we've got backwards induction that says here the agent is the last action here, and so there's nothing to force the agent to behave well if he's selfish, so we predict 0 effort. In the ex ante punishment settings, we can actually contract, we can actually force the agent to put forth effort because the punishment is pre-committed to, so it's a credible punishment threat. So we predict higher levels of effort depending on how strong that punishment is. And when punishment is after the fact, it's not a credible commitment when it's decided on after the fact, and so therefore we don't predict it to change effort. Okay, so remember we're starting from gift exchange type punishment. We're tweaking the institution along 2 dimensions to try to see whether just by changing the punishment institution we can get better outcomes as a result of peer punishment like you see in public goods games. Okay, so I'm about to show you the results in just a moment. I'm going to show you, the sets of results that we got ran back at Williams College, January 2012. If there are questions about design for clarification. All right, so results. So the first thing that I want to show you is effort. Remember, effort is what makes the pie higher here. Effort is costly cooperation. It is the cooperation measure for the gift exchange game. Horizontal axis of this graph is each subject in the game is playing each role 5 times, and so this is their stint in role on the horizontal axis. Vertical axis is effort level, which can range from 0 to 3, 0, 1, 2, or 3, okay? So the first thing that I want to show you, if I have a laser, is that this black line is the baseline treatment where there is no punishment. You add in punishment that's like a gift exchange game, that is low power and it's pre-committed to, you're wielding the stick in advance, and effort drops like a lot, like this looks like a lot, right? And so we're replicating the result from the literature, that you add a peer punishment institution, you get this worse outcome, okay? So that's just replicating what we see in the literature. I'll show you why shortly. You just crank up the power of that same timing of punishment, and it doesn't look like timing is so much the thing after all, right? Because you crank up this power and you have this line here, this brown line with the X's, and it is higher. If you ignore the first round, it is significantly higher than the baseline treatment. So just changing the power basically is making it so that you have an effective peer punishment institution, okay? Whereas the punishment that's not publicly pre-committed to is these other 2 lines, that's not at all different from baseline. So you add those kinds of punishment, you don't get any difference in cooperation, okay? Now what we want to do is think about why. So now I'm going to show you an OLS regression where the left-hand side variable is effort, and we want to see the relationship between effort and what's going on in the treatment. So we have the treatment dummies. This is telling you the same thing. The second column, we're adding in wage. We're controlling for wage. Wage is significant, not surprising to any of you who have looked at gift exchange data. But what you find now is that low power ex-ante treatment ceases to be significant. High power ex-ante treatment becomes significant and positive. So for a given wage level, I get the same performance in baseline as compared to low power ex-ante, which is telling you that basically we have worse outcomes in low power ex-ante because the principals are dropping their wage. So it's not really the case entirely that people are cooperating less because they don't like having the stick shaken at them. It is that they're getting a lower wage. Whereas in high power ex-ante, people for the same wage are behaving better, right? Go ahead, Gary.
So this is that people have observed more punishment in the high power treatment in the past. So is this an effective lag with observations of what's happening?
There is some of that going on. So you see that there is a trend upward, so there is some learning that's going on there. There is also improvement in punishment profiles that people choose, because people do design some dumb profiles and that declines over time. Yeah. So that is those are part of the things that are going on, right? And so things are much better, particularly in this last round, right? So it looks like that institution is pretty good for cooperation, especially once people can learn. And that's one thing we're still working on the analysis of that part, but that's certainly, we think that's important. The last thing I want to tell you, I'm not going to have you stare at the regression. The last thing I'm going to tell you about that part is that punishment is the reason that for a given wage level we get better cooperation in the high power as compared to the low power. Okay, so so far we find that some of the factors that are explaining what's going on in these games is that we do see the same crowd out from adding in this one punishment institution. A lot of that is explained by the fact that the punisher has said, oh, I've got a stick now, I'm not going to use this carrot anymore. So they stop giving so much wage. And that works out well when the power is high, because their stick is really effective at getting a high amount of effort out. And we don't see much effect, this punishment that can't be publicly pre-committed to. With wage, I will just tell you that wage in baseline, here, this is a similar graph. Wage in baseline is this black line. Wage, this orange line here, is low power ex post, which is the worst possible punishment if you're the principal, right? It's a weak stick, and you can't publicly pre-commit to it. That's the only case in which the wage does not drop when you have a punishment institution available to you. So principals really are substituting as long as they have a meaningful stick. The last thing I want to talk to you about, second to last thing I want to talk to you about, is that when we look at punishment, punishment is used in all treatments. And as I said, we do have some badly designed profiles, and that's declining over time. But given a punishment threat that you're facing as an agent, are you responding in a best response way? So do we see a little bit of spite? And it turns out we are seeing some interesting spite going on. So if Daniel specifies a punishment profile to me, if you look at my effort, you can see whether I am giving effort that is payoff maximizing to me, or if I'm giving below that. In the low power treatment, people actually are giving effort that is below that, and that is spite. I'm willing to bear some punishment just to say, screw you, buddy. You threatened me, and I didn't like that. But once that punishment is painful enough, then it's not worth it to me. So spite is responsive to price, to the cost of spite. So that's good. When punishment is not pre-committed to in advance, you don't know exactly what you're facing, so it's a little bit harder to figure. But it looks like people are not doing, Gary asked about the learning, it looks like people are not doing the learning that we would expect. And that's something that we're thinking about for future work. The last thing I want to tell you is our efficiency results. So the great thing about punishment in public goods games in the literature is that you can increase cooperation. Dirty little secret is that punishment actually hurts efficiency a lot of the time. So you have worse outcomes in terms of efficiency because punishment is costly. So when Daniel pays to punish me, there are his costs of paying and my costs of being punished. So when you think about net efficiency, considering those costs of punishment, several of our punishment institutions, just like the literature, do worse than having no punishment institution at all. The only time we see an improvement in net efficiency is when we look at the high power ex ante for that last round, when it seems like people are giving smarter profiles and people are learning how to respond to each other. Okay? So the upshot is we see that costly punishment pre-committed to does backfire, as we see in the literature. But it seems like a lot of that is because of low wages, and a little bit of it is because of spite, spiteful response. But once you crank up that power, no problem. You have an increased cooperation and possibly increased efficiency. When punishment can't be publicly pre-committed to, it is ineffective but not necessarily destructive. Why does it work in public good games? We think it might have to do with learning and having more punishers. All right, so I will stop there. Thank you so much, everyone. It's been wonderful to have you. Do we have a second?
So we have time for
Questions for everybody.
questions for Sarah, and then we'll open the floor to questions for everybody. The first question is for Sarah.
Please.
So, I just want to talk about this issue about efficiency, net efficiency of punishment.
Yes.
So these guys 15 years ago made up this weird one thing, which has nothing to do with the real world.
True.
So whether something is net efficient depends on how you characterize it.
That's
And
right.
everybody
Yep.
looks at this thing as if it was handed down by some being. Ernst and Seymour made it up. So,
Yeah. But remember, so when the punishment is weaker, because we are varying the strength of the punishment, it is not a good incentivizer when it's
well,
weaker.
that's because people learn that you don't see much punishment.
You do see punishment going on, so that's what, it's obviously you buy less of it, absolutely. So what,
You reported to us lots of punishment.
no, in a 20-minute presentation, I have the table if you'd like to see it, but yeah, no, people definitely buy less when
I
it's
mean, if you see that there isn't as much punishment, of course it's not.
Yes, but in addition to it not being as effective, it also has the backlash, a little bit of spiteful backlash. People playing below best response effort level, which they don't do when it's more powerful.
I don't understand.
It makes sense to me, right? Because when spite is cheap, so if it only costs me $1 to say screw you, then I might be willing to do that. But if it costs me $3, then I might say it's not worth that to take the moral stand. You see what I mean?
If you assume people are going to punish the same amount.
Right. So yeah, I'm talking about, do you play best response to the punishment that you have been given? And the answer is yes, when it's high powered. The answer is no. No, that's right. No, and I totally agree with you that there's no necessary reason why this particular parameterization should
They just
match.
make everybody use it, but
And that's part of our point in this paper, to be honest. Yeah, that's exactly right.
it is treated in the survey.
The new chapter, yeah, right, yeah, that's true.
At least in the version that wasn't published. Better.
Oh, I don't think I've seen the unpublished version. I'll have to look at it.
Much better.
Nice. Good. Well, thank you. Other comments, questions?
Well, just to this point of the punishment, the rates being different for 1-to-1 versus 1-to-3,
Yeah.
versus my willingness to spite. I mean, I think you can think about it just as if I'm the person who is choosing the action, I'm the worker.
Yeah.
I know that the punishment is pre-committed to.
Yeah.
And sometimes you're giving me the opportunity to punish the firm.
Exactly.
But it is much more costly for me to do so at 3-to-1.
Exactly.
Because
Right.
now it costs me 3 units to punish you 1.
Yeah.
Whereas at 1-to-1, you're punishing me or am I punishing you? It's unclear. But
That's
I'm giving up $1 or you $1.
Yeah. So spite is price responsive, right? So I think that's totally a sensible